Mark, it's only the second session and already you look a little tired.
Getting old, Rich. I'm getting old. Thanks.
I was giving you an excuse. Like,
to do what?
You could just say, well, I spent 6 hours at Narita Airport. How long were you there?
I got there pretty quickly.
No.
Hi, Daryl. Oh, I want to try this. Xbox turn off. It doesn't work. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't own an Xbox. Don't tell my management.
Don't you get one for free when you join the company?
I wish.
All right. Welcome to the second session of IETF116. Welcome to Yokohama, not Philadelphia, as you'll about to see in a minute. My name is Rich Sauls. I'm one of the co-chairs. Daryl Miller, remote, is the other co-chair. If you haven't already clicked in with the meeting tool, please do so. To register, it's important that we have an accurate head count so we can plan future meeting attendance, and so that we can make sure there are no patent trolls that come after us for we invented a header that infringes on their intellectual property or something. You can find the QR code outside the room. It was also up on the screen, but since Daryl is remote and signed in, you don't get to see it here. Daryl will be running the slides remotely through MeetEcho. Folks here in the room don't need to see it. We do have a fair number of remote people. Yeah, a fair number of remote. So, you want to get the next slide? Daryl will be hearing that a lot. Okay, this is the note well. Since it's early in the IETF meeting cycle, you probably have not memorized all of this yet. It is, frankly, what we call an eye chart, little tiny print. You have to squint to read it, right, in order to pass your driver's license. But it gives the reminders of how the IETF operates and what the rules are for your participation. One of our ombudsmen is there in the second row in the back with the red shirt. We will get to immediate real-time reporting and enforcement if people are mean, nasty, or unpleasant. I joke a lot. Don't take a lot of what I say seriously. Okay. Next slide, please. Meeting tips. Again, since it's early in the week, this might be worth knowing. MeetEcho is the program we use to access, if you're remote, the video and audio streams. Also, the online chat, commonly called a back channel. That's where you can post questions. If you're remote, you post questions in the messaging chat, and they'll get relayed as if you were, by someone as if you were local. Next slide. Okay, so we are actually in Yokohama. We did not transport everybody to Philly, but the URLs are still accurate. Next slide, please. Sorry, Daryl. It's midnight where he is. Okay, so this is our agenda. The first thing we need to do is get 1 or 2 people to volunteer to take minutes. If you go to the IETF agenda page in the classic web browser, you'll see one of the little icons is linked to minutes chats. Do we have anybody willing to take minutes? You don't have to record what everyone says. It's primarily, by session, what are the action items? What are the things we have to do for next time? If you want to add more detail, that's appreciated and wonderful. I'll help do that since Daryl is running the slides and has less screen view. but is anyone else willing to help take minutes? All right, I will. We can't proceed, but I'm willing to do it, so. All right. Give me a moment to open up the URL. Okay. So our basic now, it's called agenda bashing, where we go through the agenda, brief overview, and see if we need to make any modifications. The first is status updates on our existing documents that are in various states of progress, or have left the working group and are, they've left the nest and now they're off further down the pipeline. Working group document presentations, the ones that are currently in progress and being developed by the working group. And then we have a couple of proposed new documents. Finally, we'll conclude with any other business. Does anyone want to suggest changes to the agenda?
Yeah, Mark Nottingham, just noting for problem details, a few things have come up that we should probably discuss.
Okay, great. Then we'll catch that in the first section. Okay, no other changes. I'm going to give me a minute to cut and paste the agenda into the minutes, and we can start.
Okay, I'll take a moment just to give a very high-level overview of current status. I have updated this set of charts that are on our GitHub.io GitHub pages, which just gives a basic overview of where each of our documents are in the pipeline, which I'm keeping up to, or attempting to keep up to date so that I can slowly learn all of the intricacies of this ongoing process. There was some feedback in past meetings about, could we change the color of some of these so that we can actually see which ones are circle and which ones are squares? So the circle is where it currently is. And then you can see, I also color-coded where the status of the document was in the IETF115. So you'll see that we have made some progress with problem details. As Mark mentioned, there's a couple of outstanding items to discuss. There's been 2 more drafts since IE115. The YAML media type has made a lot of progress since November and is also in IESG review. And while there have been a number of drafts on a lot of the other documents, there's one of these documents, the item policy key, just has one more issue that we need to deal with before it can go to working group last call. And finally, link template is now in AD review and has made progress since our last meeting. So this covers basically high level the progress that has been made, and much appreciation to all of the people who've done work to move all of these documents forward.
Yeah, this tool is pretty cool. There are some seats up front if people need room. And some of the other working groups are going to start to use it. If you come up to the front rows, there's tables, so you don't have to have your laptop on your lap and burn your thighs. 2 other things of administrivia that I want to mention. Working groups are divided into areas. We're in the applications area, and areas are overseen by area directors. The applications in real time has 2 ADs, as they're commonly called, Murray and Francesca. Francesca is about to go on her 2nd maternity leave, as in part 2 of, she only has 1 child, part 2, cute little newborn. And So some of our work will be handled by the rest of the IESG and Murray in particular. So you'll see some when we discuss this issues of handoffs and how things are going to be handled. Francesca is available through the end of the meeting week. She is remote. And so there's, obviously based in Italy, so there's a time lag. And she's trying to wrap up as many things as she can so they're not pending. She'll be gone until the end of August. As I said, the minute if you use if you're remote and using the MeetEcho app and you want something relayed at the microphone, please put mic, M-I-C, in front of what you say, as opposed to it just being a general chat. And that will cause somebody, if I see it or someone will just yell in the room, hey, and we'll get it relayed at the mic and said into the voice, the really neat, cool automatic captioning system. First time we've had it at the IETF, but it'll get caught into the record. Otherwise, it's assumed if you don't say mic at the front that it's just part of general comments that's in the Zulu messaging chat. Okay.
So, to address the status updates for the working group, the first one I believe that was on the list was HP problem or 7807 biz. I believe these, or at least 72, item number 72 here is the one that maybe you wanted to speak with regards to, Mark?
Yeah, Mark Nottingham. So yeah, issue 72, my co-author, Eric, who I think is dialing in from Zurich right now, noticed that we designated that future standard members of the problem object would have a name that started with, I believe, an asterisk, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And that was fine for JSON and everything, but for XML, that's quite problematic because the way that the XML serialization works, it would have to be serialized into my XML is so old, into an XML element name, basically. I forget the technical term of art, but and that's not syntactically possible in XML. They require you to start with something like a letter and a couple other things. So we talked about it, and we came up with the charming idea to just start with the letters STD and a dash, which is similar to X dash, but not prohibited by an RFC, unlike X dash. So that's nice. There's since been subsequent discussion on the issue, and I think elsewhere, that we should do this quote unquote properly and tie it to URI namespace and go through all of that stuff. I am not enthusiastic about doing that. I think that is over-engineering it considerably. And also it's not backwards compatible with what we're currently doing, which is one of the main constraints we have in 7807 BIS. So that's the proposal. I think still stands to use STD dash or perhaps underscore. And we're going to try and wrap up that discussion pretty soon.
As in at this meeting in the follow-on?
Well, we'll have to confirm on the list, of course.
That's hence the follow-on.
Right. So if folks have opinions about that, that would be great to hear. There's another issue that I'll point out. There are a couple of other issues on the list, but they're largely editorial things that I don't think we need to spend time on. They're just a little embarrassing that they only got caught after it got approved by the ISG. There is another issue that Eric noticed, which was that we are using examples whereby the status code is a 400, for example, I think, and the semantics of the body don't really match a 400 status code. And so Eric and I have had a discussion, which unfortunately we haven't reflected in the issues list yet, but can we change the examples to be a little more demonstrative of best practice for how you use status codes and HTTP APIs? which this was kind of bugging me in the back of my mind as well before Eric brought it up, and I think it's a good thing to address. So I think what we'll probably do is come up with a proposal in a pull request and put that by the list. I don't think it's a controversial thing. These are just examples. I just want to make sure that people are aware that we're doing that as well. So I think for this meeting, the interesting thing is, what do people have feedback about namespacing future standard names for members of a problem object?
Okay. Rough show of hands, how many people really care about XML these days? How many people care about XML these days? Not really. Those are two separate questions. I put
my hands on the floor.
Yeah. Don't you have a WS star in your background, Mark? Okay. Is anybody opposed to using STD for standard, not the medical term, as the prefix for standards defined namespaces when turning problem into XML?
No, this would be for all, both in JSON and...
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. So for all standards defined problem elements, extensions defined in future standards, extensions defined in future standards will start with STD dash. Did I get that right? Okay. Is there anybody who has a problem with that? If you want to, you can go to the mic, Austin. Say your name and then, yeah, you can take the mask off when you talk.
Hello, I'm Austin Wright. I may have actually kickstarted this by asking for some sort of namespace that applies to properties in all types. And then I think I suggested the @ sign, and then Mark suggested using the star because that's legal in HTTP fields. So there's another question to think about for this. Should we just restrict the names of properties and error objects to just be the intersection of anything that's legal in XML and HTTP, and just prohibit star and things like that? That seems to be the logical conclusion of this argument. Should we just prohibit the star for any field name because that won't work in XML?
I think that's a different issue.
Okay. In any event, the STD dash, I don't know if that really reflects what I was looking for, which was just a global property name. I think that's, unless I've gotten one of the issues mixed up, but yes. Maybe something like global dash or something to that effect.
Okay. Are you fine with the proposed solution? Can you live with it? Okay. All right. I seem to have temporarily lost the network. Give me a sec here. There we go. Now it's back. Of course. Mark.
Mark Nottingham again. Austin does bring up an interesting point, though, in that the XML serialization that we have isn't capable of reflecting the full space of possible extensions that someone might put into their JSON, which is, the canonical model for this. And so I wonder if do we believe that the XML serialization needs to be backwards compatible is another question, because maybe the right thing to do here is to fix the XML serialization and give it a new media type. Or, as I've said countless times before, drop it. I'll run away now.
Rich Saul speaking as an individual. I think a good enough solution for XML these days seems to be good enough for HTTP APIs.
I'm not sure what that means.
Stick with std dash.
Right. So that will, I think we probably need to insert some advice that you need to be careful in choosing your extension names if you ever intend to use XML.
That's okay. That's fair. I think that's a good approach. Okay, so sorry. The plan is to do std dash, include some text about noting limitations if you're going to be using XML serialization of these problem reports, and we will confirm that on the lists and look for a PR that does this. Okay.
Sounds like a plan. Excellent. Stop me if there were other issues with regards to problem details, but otherwise I will. Do we want to just talk for a moment about link template HTTP header? There are no outstanding issues with link template header, right? So it's basically just we're just moving ahead with the process. And
yeah, Francesca gave her pretty beach there. Is that what you're recording from, Daryl?
It's like all of the windows that I had opened a second ago have just now disappeared completely. Don't mind me while I just go and find all the screens that have disappeared.
All right. So Francesca, our short-time AD, she was also reappointed by NOMCOM, so she'll be back on the job in September 1st. She has done her AD report. We had some discussion, I think, about some use of keywords, but I think she's basically satisfied. We'll double check that, and Murray will be carrying it, driving it forward. She's not satisfied.
No, the responsible AD is not Murray.
Oh, okay. Sorry. It's somebody else in ISG. Okay. Fair enough. So we'll probably, as the chairs and Mark, we'll have to do some education of them, but it should just be basically moving it forward, just a matter of time.
Okay, excellent. YAML media type, I believe, Roberto, you have slides. Do you want to take over sharing to talk to the YAML media type, or do you want me to share your slides?
Hello.
Hi, Roberto.
Well, if you can share, it would be great.
Okay. Yeah, I think I will be able to do that.
Hi, everybody. Thanks to the chairs. Well, that's easy. We are trying to register media types that are useful to producing and consuming REST APIs and YAML. And next slide. So this is to increase API interoperability and simplify the work around cataloging APIs and content related to API. The main documents are two. There is the YAML media type that is almost complete, and the other document that is about JSON schema and OpenAPI that is still stuck waiting to have more feedback from the JSON schema and OpenAPI community. The JSON LD part have been stripped off and moved to the W3C. Next. Okay, this was explained before, so we can move on. So this was the summary. YAML is complete. OpenAPI plus JSON is a simple catch, but there are some bits. And the challenge on the second document is to create a common ground for OpenAPI and JSON schema for both OpenAPI, for both JSON and YAML. As I said, YAML LD moved to the W3C JSON LD working group. Next slide, please. Well, YAML is complete. There were minimal changes from the previous version. We got our director feedback that is strict on the 73 issue. We have one pull request that address one of the issue raised by Francesca. Thanks, Francesca. That is to explicitly state that the deprecated media type aliases were never registered. And another issue filed by Francesca is that should we recommend, as in normative language, .yaml over .yml, because now we just say that the .yaml is the preferred way to is the preferred extension. We didn't use normative language, or we tried to reuse the normative language where it was required by the opinion of the editors. But on these, we are open. I do not have any preference, so the work group is the master, and we are waiting for feedback. For the REST API, there are long discussion. We are in high C, so I think we should focus on consolidating YAML, and then in the next meeting, we can focus together with the JSON schema on REST APIs. Well, for now, I finish. So have your say on these two issues, or if there are other issues. Just let us know. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Roberto.
Speaking as an individual, I have no objection at all to recommending using YAML. I think it would be beneficial to the community to have a recommended single extension rather than having multiple.
Does anyone in the meeting have a preference to not making a preference known between YAML or YML? All right, we'll confirm that on the list too. And thank you, Roberto.
Okay, so I don't believe we have a presentation actually for idempotency key, unless somebody has sprung one up that I'm not aware of. So then I think what we'll do is we'll just open the floor up for discussions on the remaining issue, and I'm just going to pull that back up again. There is one issue that has surfaced on idempotency key, and surprise, surprise, it's about structured fields. The suggestion is that instead of using a string structured field, to use a binary structured field. And there has been some conversation about this between Sanjay and myself. Just to kind of quickly summarize, this is what a binary field would look like. In the examples, idempotency key is generally presented as a UUID. I don't believe it is an absolute requirement. SF binary would present a UUID as base64 encoded sequence of octets with colons as delimiters, whereas an SF string is a quote delimited sequence of characters representing the UUID. Depending on how you look at it, it's kind of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, as the expression goes. The only justification that I could come up with as to why you would use the binary is you don't have to, if somebody actually did do string comparison, because obviously one of the primary things that you're going to do with this thing is compare it with some other requests that came in and make sure that they are different values. If you're using the string value, somebody might forget to take off the quotes. You may have different case renderings of the GUID value. That's less likely in binary. But Sanjay brought up the point. People are used to seeing these UUIDs and might want to visually compare the UUIDs whilst debugging. Sanjay, did that kind of capture, or is there anything else you want to add with regards to the conversation we've had here? Okay. Okay. So this is the one open issue. I think there's one other comment that I added, which applies less to this particular spec, but I do know that I see a fair number of UUIDs used in the wild for a variety of different reasons. And this does set somewhat of a precedent as to what would be the preferred way of serializing UUIDs in headers. And so it would be nice if moving forward we did it all the same way, and it would not be ideal if some specs used FF string and some used SF binary. So if folks have any strong opinions one way or the other, it would be great to hear them.
So, all right. Is anybody using SF using structured fields to carry UUIDs? And if so, are they sending them as strings or binary types, right? So I guess as far as this meeting is concerned, we are setting a precedent, not trying to follow an existing one, it seems.
Pete brings up an interesting comment in the chat in saying, even if you did carry those over the wire as strings, you should be comparing them on a byte by byte basis. The question is that likely going to be what's going to happen? Or are people just going to say, it's a string, I'm just going to compare the two strings?
Nobody has preferences or an opinion on this they wish to express? Pick one and bring it to the list. Author's choice.
Justin's has...
What, Mark?
Pick both.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Mark Nottingham suggests do both. We have someone come. Justin.
You can alternate the form.
Hi, Justin Richer. Yeah, you can totally do it this way. I just want to say that as somebody coming largely from the outside, I've kind of followed this group from a distance. UUIDs as a binary just feels weird as an implementer. Like I'm used to seeing them in the format with the dashes, even though I know that underlying it's a binary structure. To me, line 2 in that example is not a UUID. And so I would not expect it to look like that. Just from a developer's perspective, it's odd. I understand the benefits of making it binary.
Speaking as an individual, as one of the tech leads on DCE, where UUIDs came from, I totally agree with Justin. It's not a UUID. It looks like a key fingerprint when it's done like that. So I am in favor of string.
Okay. There seems to be a siding on the side of strings.
We'll ask on the list.
Yep. Okay. But okay. Excellent. Sanjay, it looks like we may be able to move forward there. That's very good. Okay.
Yeah. So if we can close this in like a week after the meeting, is it then ready for last call?
I shall not speak for Sanjay, but I believe so.
Okay. All right. So March. So, by the end of April, we should have another draft and push for last call of that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Good.
Okay. Rate limit headers. We have made progress. Roberto, since IETF115, Roberto created a new draft to bring the 3 headers into a single header using structured fields. But there are a number of open discussions, and Roberto's co-author Alex has mentioned that he does not have as much time as he had in the past, and so it looks like we may need another co-author to support Roberto in this effort moving forward.
Hi. Yes, I think that since we decided to move to structure fields, I think that this is an opportunity to rethink the way of passing information, because just sending the same kind of information in the same way we did without using structure fields doesn't bring too much benefit. So the real goal of the previous draft was interoperability with current practices. But if we have to not be backward compatible, I think we should think how we imagine rate limit should work in the next 10 years. So I think that the point here is not just releasing a new draft with some makeup in structure field source, but make some work of imagination on how we should pass this kind of information, service information between user agent and origins.
Yeah, and if I'm just, I think this issue is probably the conversation around quota unit measurement is probably the most
yes, there are some
active
questions.
conversation.
Yes.
Because the draft as at this point in time opens the door to saying that you can have different policies with different units, and there has been some discussion about, well, should we actually define the taxonomy of what those units could be, and there's conversations about how to correlate what are the remaining limits available for the specific units. And currently there isn't a way to correlate back to how many of what particular unit is available. So I would encourage anybody who has opinions about that particular topic to get involved in the conversation, and I'll certainly continue working with you, Roberto, so that we can try and move these issues forward. But I appreciate you calling out the fact that due to the change that we agreed on last in IETF 115, that we have an opportunity now to build something for the future.
Also, Roberto is not doing this work full-time either. So we yet another reason why we need an additional author. Daryl will be a co-author. So any process questions and any substantive discussion, anything that requires a working group chair to comment or call consensus or so on, I'll be handling. And Daryl will just be, when we're talking about the rate limit stuff, Daryl will just be a regular person. Not that he's not a real person now, but you know what I mean. So it's not it happens often in working groups. Obviously, they have two or more chairs where somebody has to help finish a draft or submits a small, simple one, and then the other chair takes over, making sure all of the managing of the document and the process and the shepherding and so on. So I'll be doing that. And thanks very, very much to Roberto and Alex for all the work they've done so far in getting this document, which is going to be, I think, pretty important. So thank you, Roberto and Alex.
We have already discussed API media types, which leaves us with our deprecation header. Deprecation header also has a number of open issues. Structured field date seems to be the main blocker from moving forward. Eric, do you want to speak to it at all?
Yeah, I can. So, and to be honest, I think this was already an open issue in the last IETF. So it was an issue that was brought up because the deprecation header was modeled after the sunset header, which predated deprecation header, which has been an RFC for a while now, which uses just kind of a little bit old-fashioned notation for how dates are being represented, but it's something that at least there's some history in HTTP headers. And the issue was brought up that if we define new header fields, then maybe we should start using structured fields instead of defining a syntax that is not really compatible with structured fields. And then that brought up the issue, if we do that, how would that look like? Because there is no built-in way of doing that in structured fields, or at least there was. And the other thing is that the preference in that space seems to be to use basically just images, which have the disadvantage that they're not very human readable, and also that they do not allow any sub-second resolution, if that is something that you need. And the discussion, I think, is still unresolved which way to go. So I think one way it's pointing is that it would be good to use kind of the old-fashioned syntax, because then it would be compatible with the sunset header field, and both are doing related things, so it would be nice if they worked at least in a similar way. And the other argument goes that whatever we define going forward should use structured fields, because structured fields should take over time, and therefore we should then use that new way of representing datetime values, which would make the deprecated header field look very different from the sunset header field. And I think that, again, that issue has been around for a while, but it still is unresolved.
I have a question for Mark. Do you know what the current status is of SFBiz that defines date?
Mark Nottingham. I'm waiting to see if it knows my name. Yes, it does. Good. That document is nearing completion. We have just a few more things to clean up in it. I have to say we still have, concerns about adoption there, that if you folks don't want to adopt it, we wonder, whether that's going to be good or not. But there seems to be very strong consensus in the community there that that's the right way to do it. Regarding this draft, if I recall the discussion in London, we ended up wondering whether we wanted to step back and kind of rethink the whole space around life cycle of APIs and have a header for that, rather than doing it piecemeal like we've been doing with sunset and deprecation and so forth. And I was very interested in that, but I haven't seen much activity there, so I'm just wondering what other folks think about that.
Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right, Mark, that we discussed this, and it's true. I mean, I also think that's an interesting way to explore. I think we just had, I would say, differing opinions in terms of how much changes would be required. So in my mind, coming up with an API lifecycle header field is an interesting approach, but I also think it would be something that basically would mean we kind of just stop the deprecation header work and start with an API lifecycle spec, which would be relatively different. So maybe for everybody, very briefly, so the lifecycle idea would be that instead of having a specific header field for specific lifecycle events, such as sunsetting an API or deprecating an API or a resource, there would be a lifecycle header field that would allow you to associate any kind of lifecycle that you may have. So you might have tags where you say this is experimental, this is in production, this is deprecated, and so forth. And that would be a more flexible way of doing things, but it also would require us to do something like probably like a registry where we can manage the well-known values and an extension model where people can add their own values and so forth. It's not that none of that has been done before, but as Mark has said, it's enough work. I'd say that so far nobody has done the work to basically come up with this completely new spec that would be an interesting thing to do. I agree, but yes, this is still kind of just an idea.
Rich Sauls, speaking as an individual, a concern that I would have about the lifecycle header is then it gets into what the user agent should do about notifying the user. I mean, deprecation, you can sort of almost treat as an oncoming, incoming expiration header, but do you do a pop-up that says you're using an experimental API? Do you know you're using an experimental API? Has the client confirm that, or am I completely off base judging by your looks there, Mark?
Mark Nottingham, in a way, you're getting, I think, to the heart of the issues of how does this affect how APIs are consumed. I mean, there isn't a user agent, really. It's not in the sense that there's a user standing behind a browser. There's, some code that's calling an API, and how does that affect how that code operates? or how the designer, is it design time, is it runtime? There's lots of different questions to be had there. And I guess I'd be much more comfortable overall with, deprecation header and these other mechanisms if we had a picture of how that worked and how that all fit together.
Okay.
Just as one data point, in APIs I work on, we do return deprecated headers. They have an impact on developer experience. When developers are working, the clients will write out logs when they see those headers. Also, there are other gateways that look for users who are making calls to APIs that are returning those deprecated headers, and there are a variety of different ways that information is communicated back to the application developer to say, hey, you're calling APIs that are deprecated. So there's no one single solution. There's just a bunch of different ways that you can pick out that information. Yes, Hans, Joe?
Hi, this is Hans-Jörg from Odriga. Probably I'm making a little bit of an uninformed statement, so forgive me if I might overlook here something. But I have one observation, one question. So certainly I think there is a design space here where several things seems to overlap. So I remember there was also a draft, or there still is, regarding alternative servers to fall back on. I think I heard that in the London session. Is that right? Does anybody know what I mean? No? Okay. I will look it up what I mean here. However, my second point is actually a question. So another aspect I see here is something like a maintenance thing. So what is there a way to signal this API is coming for maintenance, like say tomorrow or on short notice or something like that to the client? Was that discussed at some point, or is there something by that? Yeah. If anybody can answer, thanks.
Eric?
Yeah, good question. No, right now I think that's not a scenario that is part of the spec. So if you say this is coming up for deprecation, that kind of hints towards a permanent state of being deprecated. But I think that's one of the interesting things of the lifecycle approach, where we could say, okay, if there is like a temporary outage, maybe that's another interesting lifecycle type that we could then add to the registry, right? And say there's an outage type, which maybe even has two aspects to it. There's outage starts, outage ends, or something like this. So then that could be something that you could communicate as well. And if we did go this route of a lifecycle spec with an extensible space of values, I would definitely see that we would see more and more, hopefully, of these values where people come up with these scenarios. But right now, at least how the draft as it stands is written, deprecation is meant to be something permanent.
So I'm hearing that people find the concept of a lifecycle header field interesting, but I don't see anyone jumping up to the mic to say they are willing to help write a new draft on this area. So barring that, let's keep moving the deprecation header forward. And if someone has energy, time, and interest to work on API life cycles as is signaled through header fields, post to the list and start writing. Mark
Nottingham, yeah, but with all respect, I don't think we should just continue publishing deprecation because of inertia. Is it the right thing to do is the question.
Okay. Thoughts or comments from anyone? And state your name first for the mic.
Hugh Meisel. I agree. I can see that if deprecation were to go ahead as its own header and then later someone were to work on lifecycle, there would be two competing ways to signal a deprecation, and it would be perhaps unclear which one is the ideal one to use.
I think the challenge is we are already in that state with the existence of Sunset already being there. I think one of the interesting questions is there is I'll use the word non-trivial amount of usage already of the deprecation header. The question is it worth the effort to document what is currently out there, or should we be more forward-looking?
Mark, yeah.
Make the tools easy to use. Mark Nottingham. We seem to come across this again and again, and it would be good to probably sort it out as a group, of what our scope here is, because there's always this tension between we're just documenting what people are doing out there, we're paving the cow path, and we can't go outside of those bounds, versus, okay, let's step back, look at the requirements, come up with a structured way to do this that is a little more far-reaching. And they're certainly both valid approaches, but if we keep on, having this kind of tension in the discussions, it's not great. So we should figure out philosophically what this group is about, I think.
Yeah, go. Sure.
This is Hans-Jörg again. So regarding Darrell's comment, my question would be, you say it's out in the wild. So how many servers and client libraries probably do support it, or do you have any examples? I don't know. Because in that case, probably it might be worthwhile, because I think the larger picture of a lifecycle model certainly might be something that would take some time, also to develop the overall model and things like that. It goes far beyond a simple expiration header, I would say.
Yeah, I can't give you numbers, which was why I was hesitant to say non-trivial amount. I think the other question there to ask is, if people are already using it successfully, like, do we need to write a spec? What is that going to then bring? I think the problem we've said in the past is, let's write specs if there is a lot of variability in how people are doing it. If we don't have that problem, then we're not solving any problem by spending time writing the spec.
Right. It's Mark again. I think the other really interesting aspect of this, which that kind of brings up, is that HTTP APIs are a bit different in that, a lot of these practices are things that people just put into their APIs, and it's not clear that they're supported by generic tools or implementations, at all, or certainly in an interoperable fashion. It's just, they're practices that people have. And so even if it's in a few APIs, I don't know if I would say that that's, proof of success or interoperability. It's just some people knew that they needed something in this area. I think I said before, I'd be much more comfortable if we looked at the problem space and said, okay, there's a solution out there and it's the right one, because we understand how it operates and how it's going to lead to better interoperability of tools and HTTP APIs, rather than just saying, oh, well, some people are doing it, let's go ahead and put a stamp on it then, because we might not be putting a stamp on terribly good practice.
Anybody else have comments?
Eric is in the queue.
Oh,
go ahead, Eric.
Sorry, didn't see you, Eric. Go.
Yeah, just from my point of view, it's not that people just invented, so to speak. I think the deprecation header as it's being used right now, I think what happened was that people were seeing the sunset header, and then there was some feedback saying, oh, that would be interesting to have that for deprecation as well. And then the draft development started actually quite a while ago. And I think people just started picking it up because they felt like it was something that solved their problem of signaling that kind of deprecation. So at the very least, I think it's a practice that has evolved because of some other spec being out there. And that was the whole motivation to start and develop that spec, even though it may only solve that one specific problem, but I think it did solve it in a way where a number of people said, oh, that's useful, maybe we'll do it that way.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit around this issue. We'll have to keep discussing it on the list and figure out what we want as a working group, our next step to be. Does that make sense, Daryl?
Yeah, I think
Mark,
so.
you okay with that? Sure. Okay. Thanks. And thank you, Eric.
Okay, so that brings us to the close of our existing documents and the status and updates on those. We have 2 additional proposals for working group documents. The first one is link relationship types for authentication. Everett, do you want to share your screen, or do you want me to share your slides for you?
To share my screen.
Okay.
Let's see.
I think I might have to stop sharing first.
Okay.
There you go.
So I've put in a request.
For those who didn't scan at the door, now is your chance to scan the QR code and get registered for the meeting. Too late.
There you go.
Okay. Cool. Oops, already skipped ahead. Hello. Let's see. I hope everyone can hear me. So, hi, my name is Evert. It's my first time at an IETF thing, first session as well. So if I'm doing something that's out of the ordinary, it's because I'm new, and apologies in advance. So my background is that I've been doing hypermedia related technology, open source projects for the last 6 or 7 years, which is, when I did the math, a lot more than I expected. So one of the things that, like, I run into patterns, and one of those patterns I ran into at some point is this thing called link relationship types for authentication. So we'll quickly demonstrate what that is.
Everett, could you just turn down your gain just a little bit? You're getting fuzz over here.
Yes, I can do that. Cool.
Oh, that's good.
Okay. Yes, this is my rationale. So people who build hypermedia style applications, we use formats like HEL, sometimes HTML, Siren. There's a whole bunch, and we kind of use the IANA link relations registry as vocabulary. And it's kind of a good place to kind of look for kind of common features and common ways to describe relationships. So I ran into a situation often where we wanted something related to authentication. And so I decided I'm just going to write up something and also kind of use this in our tooling. And over time, other people also started adopting this. I originally submitted this as a proposal to a couple of different places, including like the OAuth2 group, and I forget, something called ART, and I think that happened before I think HTTP API existed. I didn't really get a lot of interest there, which is fine, but Over the years, like I've originally wrote this in 2019. Over the years, a lot of people have kind of come to me and said, "Oh, we're using this. Like, do you plan to turn this into a standard?" To which my answer is, maybe. I don't know how that works. So this is where we are today. So these are roughly the proposals I put in this document. I'm shortening link relationship types to rel. The first one is authenticate. And the meaning of this is that, if I'm looking at a website, for instance, then a link with this relationship type will lead me to a place where I can authenticate. A second one, authenticated as, which roughly means this is the resource that this is pointing to is a representation of the current user who's currently logged in. A third one, log out. Maybe speaks for itself. If not, let me know. Happy to elaborate. And the last one, register user. So, similar, if you see a button on a website that says sign up or register, this would be a good link relationship for this. So some example use cases for this. So the authenticate link, one example is that, so with OAuth 2, there's already a facility to find the next step, so the authentication URL for a link. But that's not really what like a regular browser user uses. Like they won't look, they don't speak the OAuth 2 protocol. And so when we're building hypermedia applications, we also don't necessarily need to understand OAuth 2 to follow a link that puts a user into this authentication process. So if I'm accessing an API and this API supports HTML, it might return a document or PAL or whatever that is. It might return a document that says, here you can authenticate for this current endpoint. And that would be a case where maybe you get this with a 401 or maybe not. But either way, this would be the maybe the HAL equivalent of you can here you go here to log in. Yeah, so one of the kind of ways we use this is we try to build generic clients and also browsers for hypermedia formats. So we were able to kind of pick up on these kind of link relationships and change the UI to automatically display something like a login button. Some examples for authenticated as. So as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of a way to find out who am I, and then for a lot of hypermedia APIs, this could be a good endpoint to discover additional information. So for instance, if I'm a blogger, then who am I might lead to an endpoint that gives me a list of articles I wrote. Yes, there's that's one example. And it could so you can also use it as a global identifier if you use URIs for identifiers, which we do. Yeah, so similar. I kind of explained this earlier. I guess I should have done a rehearsal for this. But like, so logout is for, just being able to render a logout button when that's relevant. Some little bit of background is that, so I wrote it in 2019, so it's long expired. A bunch of people still like ask me, so we use in our own systems. I did some search on the internet, and I know at least Drupal has some of this integrated. And I think primarily there's been a bunch of people that more privately kind of told me we use this in our system. This is useful, all that stuff. So I think a couple of months ago I also submitted to the HTTPI list for some feedback, and so I got some lukewarm responses, which was exciting. So I also wanted to share some other stuff that are kind of just some similarities and overlap. One is interactive authentication of interactive HTTP requests. I don't know if I copied that right. I think this is also from the last meeting in this group. I think there is some overlap in what is happening there. Although I think that is actually still more meant for more specific clients for specific services. Versus what we want to do, which is more similar to how a real browser might interact with a server. I think there's also some overlap with the subject identifier in OpenID Connect token. I think whatever goes in there might also be a good candidate for what you would use for authenticated as in some cases. OpenID also has a protocol for logging out. And I also thought there's some little bit of overlap in terms. There's another spec for a way for, say, password managers and other systems to detect a central place for allowing users to change their passwords. All of these are not exact fits, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of share things that are in solving things in a similar problem space. So some questions. I think from all these three, nobody has really kind of commented on registered user in terms of oh, we use this. And also I put it originally in the draft thinking this would be useful. We haven't used it either. So I'm kind of thinking this probably shouldn't be in there just because I think it's important that there's usage before anything would turn into an RFC number, as I understand it. And there was some discussion on the list as well about the naming of these link relationships. One of those questions, or one of the suggestions was, oh, should, instead of the link relationship log out, should it maybe be log out page? Because usually you would go to your page to log out, or log out resource. I think, there's some questions asked. My opinion about this is that I think, there's a lot of stuff in, I don't know if I shared this. No, there's a lot of stuff in this IANA existing list that don't necessarily prescribe how it works. And for instance, there's author, there's about, there's address, there's next, and I think it's more in that category of link relationships where here's a building block that you can use to build your tools and systems without necessarily prescribing what you get on the other end of this link relationship. And what that is usually, you figure it out through context or media types. And I felt that resource, I think usually go to your resource. Although I'm not sure if technically a non-URL, like a URN or something, I don't know if that's technically a resource. So so those were some questions. And then, that's basically all I got. So I'm curious to hear if anyone has feedback or, how that sounds.
There was a question in the chat. I'll let Mark go first. No. Okay, there's a question in the chat from Sanjay asking whether what was the reaction from the OAuth working group? Would it be more suited to be in their group as opposed to HTTP API?
So there was no reaction.
No, let them do their little thing.
Yeah, they don't deal with headers, right? Yeah. They're all protocol units.
Yeah. Yeah, there was no reaction. I've had some other kind of similar discussions with them, trying to get them to use link relationships and stuff. It's just that I think they're just not interested, and also I'm just not really sure how to engage with a group that doesn't respond. So I don't know if that means that I asked the question wrong, and I'm very much a newbie. So yeah.
What kind of animal did you sacrifice before you sent the message?
What gifts did you send the chair?
Okay. Mark Nottingham. Hi, Everett. I raised kind of the question about the naming. I think it's not, I'm not suggesting that the names change necessarily. I just think we should think about it. Link relations tend to either be kind of semantic or functional, and we should figure out what these are and act appropriately. And I can see the argument you're making. I think that it might be good enough just to, leave it open there and let it fall. So I'd very much support adoption of this. I think this is good work. I think, especially, with my hat of the link relation expert on, it makes it a lot easier when generic kind of meaty topics like this get registered from RFCs rather than more casually. So it's really good you're bringing it here. Thank you. I think that we probably need to engage with the security community, not with OAuth, but with the security folks to make sure that they're comfortable with what we're doing here.
Yeah, definitely. For Everett and those who are also new to the IETF, the next step would be, assuming you wish to do some of this work in the IETF, is for us to issue a call for adoption. That would typically take 1 or 2 weeks. People discuss it on the mailing list. And at that point, then you submit a new draft, which has, it starts with the name draft IETF-HTTPAPI. The IETF then owns the copyright and change control. The copyright's very, very liberally licensed. We have a whole nonprofit foundation set up to control those rights in perpetuity for free use. And then you get collaborators from the working group, hopefully people to read and review. Cool. For a show of hands, how many people here have read the document? A couple, Mark, Austin, some others. How many people would be willing and able to help contribute, read, review, write, something like that, this document? Okay, Alexi, Mark, a couple of people. All right, before we talk about a call for consensus, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Hans.
This is Hans-Jörg again. I have a short question. So I'm not sure I completely understood it, maybe not correctly, but is this something I only see when I initially, access the service or log in, or is it something I will continually see on responses on requests? And I somehow also wonder, I mean, this is sort of a little bit of a metadata to an HTTP API, I would say, and probably this is also somehow related to the lifecycle thing we discussed before, because there might also be the dimension, I think, of changing authentication methods at a certain point or something like that. So at least I see there might be a slight overlap or relation between those things, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is very much kind of dependent on your situation. I can share some examples of how we use this. So one of the systems we're building is that we have this middleware that transforms any hypermedia format to an HTML format that developers can just interactively browse. And so any kind of like hypermedia features or good standard HTTP features that we support kind of bubble up, including, we use the depreciation header and turn it to an HTML warning and console to log it and stuff. And so the authenticated as for us appears in two different places. Is that it can always appear in a header, which is, you browse maybe an API anonymously and you can authenticate at any point. So it really just becomes a login link. And also on 401 responses, we added as a link header. So we to also be able to render, allow a user basically to take the next step to resolve the 401. Something like authenticated as for us, usually, a lot of hypermedia APIs will have a home document where other services can be discovered. So authenticated as is typically where that would appear. It's just an endpoint saying this is where you find more information about the currently logged in user. Log out very much is a UI thing. So we don't really use that for machine clients. It's more users interacting with these hypermedia APIs and basically needing a facility to log out. One thing I would love to see, and this is more of pipe dream stuff, I'd love to see at some point browsers adopt some of this, because like how great would it be that there's some browser Chrome that actually lets you log out straight from, let's say, the address bar or something. It's kind of a shame that like authentication is all kind of like inside the web view area and nothing is in the Chrome. So maybe this could be a small step towards that, but yeah.
Ian, go ahead.
Ian Williams with AWS. I was going to say, you mentioned Chrome for doing things like automatic login. I'd also think like password managers or something would be able to use this pretty heavily. But one of the things I was going to ask specifically about the document, I didn't see anything in relation to handling multiple of the same header. So as an example, like if you have an application set up in a corporate environment, you might have one page for built-in username password auth and another one for single sign-on. And I'm wondering, is there considerations in the document that I missed for those types of situations? Specifically,
I think
like two specific link headers you'd need.
Cool. Yeah. So very much not prescribing like how people use this and like other links. And I think I can think of two scenarios. Is that first, in almost every context where these link relationships are used, you can use titles. So that's HTML. You can use a label, obviously, but also link headers have titles, which hopefully lets people, implementers, give users a clue of like what kind of login step they're making. But I also suspect that for kind of the interactive scenario, that if you want to log in, you press the login link, that maybe that's a decision the user makes after following the link as the next step to go through the link login process. But that's like, a lot of these things are in a way like this is just kind of how we use it, how you think about it. But I think it is not prescriptive because multiple links can appear, and in most cases those are not. If there's multiple, that's not necessarily prescribed in these, in most of the definitions of those link relationships. It's really your vocabulary first.
Gotcha. I guess.
But that's a good answer. But yeah.
I guess I was trying to say, like, should this document be prescriptive on how to handle more than one? Using the Chrome example, should it prefer the link header with browser in the name or user or something of that nature? So
yeah, that's a good question.
One question I had was I was wondering whether you've had requests for supporting scenarios like follow this link to go acquire an API key or go provision an OAuth client to register a client to be able to handle all of the dance that needs to happen before a client can actually call an API.
Yeah, I have a pretty good feeling, and I could be wrong here, but I feel that stuff, that more the OAuth 2 kind of plumbing to, I think already, all that stuff already exists, I think, at least in the OAuth 2 specific world. And it could be wrong there, but there's like, dynamic registration. And I think they actually do have some drafts for discovering those initial endpoints as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but actually, I think they also use link relationships for some of it, but use underscores, which I think is invalid. But yeah.
Any other questions about the draft? All right.
Yes, can each join the queue?
Yep. Kenichi Shibashi from Google. So I'm wondering what's the expected behavior from the client side when server provide this header. So do we expect to redirect to the authentication page?
So yeah, so very much like with link relationships, I think it's like that is not prescribed. I think it is usually as a hypermedia client, and it includes like a regular browser. I think it's really like you get a response, which is really a set of options of potential next steps to take, and so whether that's an actual user making the decision or a machine doing that, I think for the most part, it's like it doesn't necessarily say you must do this. I think if you have a requirement to force a user to redirect to the link, to the target of the link, I think you just want to use a location header. In addition, I think like if somebody would want to use this link relationship to make that sort of prescription, I think that would be maybe in conjunction with a media type that makes a little bit more sense. Like you could add type text HTML if you're basically saying, I'm suggesting you redirect your browser to this location or use some other media type for other formats. Yeah, so I think it's basically what I'm saying is like it's not prescribed. It's very much just part of like a common vocabulary that people can use to solve a variety of these types of problems. So if that's something you'd want to do, I think it's like you can define that further down the chain, basically. If that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Mark?
It's Mark again. I've said in a very slightly different way. I think in that, to get useful utility out of a link relation, you have to specify the behaviors associated with it. And the question really is, how much of that is in the spec that we write, that's baked into the link relation? How much is the application that is, and if you look at the RFC for link relations, we talk explicitly about applications that use link relations. And so how much do we leave up to it and in its hands, and how much is at the discretion of the client? And if it's all in the discretion of the client, it's kind of one of those semantic link relations where it's like bookmark or whatever, But if it's all in the spec, then it's at the other end of the scale, which is completely functional. You have a whole protocol once you get to discover this link relation. It sounds like you want to be somewhere in the middle, and it's probably just in the discussions in the working group once we adopt it. We need to nail that down and reason it out, that's fine. It's good because a lot of link relations aren't explicit about that.
So I don't believe there are anybody else in the queue. Thank you very much, Everett, for presenting. I believe next steps are a call for adoption on the list. Is that correct, Rich?
Yeah, well, we can first do a hum here, and then we'll confirm it on the list, because officially all IETF work is done on the mailing list. So what I'll do is there'll be 3 possible answers. Do you support adoption? Are you against adoption, or do you not know yet? You hum. If you're in favor, you hum. As I ask each one, I'll ask for a hum. And judging by the loudness of the hum, that will help determine the consensus. There's a whole reason behind why we hum. You can't intimidate other people into voting as a block and things like that. There is, of course, an RFC on it. So if people want to amuse themselves, they can look for IETF RFC humming in their favorite search engine. Yes, Alexi. Yeah, remote people just type, yes, no, unsure for now. We don't have a good humming tool with Meet Echo. So all those in favor of adoption, and again, this is going to be confirmed on the list. So all those in favor of adoption, please hum now. All those opposed to adoption, please hum now. All those who do not yet know what they think about it, please hum now. Okay, so that was really strong consensus to adopt this document. Everett will confirm this on the mailing list, and then we'll work with you to help you, guide you through the process.
Cool. Thank you very much for having me.
No, not at all. Thank you very much for coming. It's always great to have new people, new blood joined into the IETF. So thank you.
And thank you for staying up till 1:30 in the morning to do this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, which brings us to our last presentation of the evening, or midday, depending on where you are. Austin with a byte range patch media type. Austin, would you like to share your screen?
Do you have slides? Yes, they're uploaded, so he can do it. You just have to interrupt yourself and say, "Next slide, please. Next slide."
Oh, I see. Okay, I will. Yes.
No, it's You can take the mask off while you talk.
Okay. Just give me one moment where I find the window that has the. There it is. Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Austin Wright. Like Everett, I have some experience with developing and designing HTTP servers and tool chains for hypermedia APIs. That's where most of my interest is. I currently edit on JSON schema, if anyone has any questions about that. And
do you have a
do we have the slideshow?
Yeah, while he's getting the slide, do you have a question
I
mark?
have to share my screen.
You're in the queue. Is that from previous? Okay, no problem.
Okay, you should be seeing it now.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yes, there we go. And one of the projects I had been working on, or just sort of, was different ways to communicate like long-running operations and resumable uploads and segmented uploads. So uploading a large document in chunks, and if it gets interrupted, not having to restart all of that data that you already uploaded. And also very long operations, like I need to append to this document once every hour. That's not really suitable for a normal HTTP connection. So the common denominator of all of these was an idea that I came up with actually while looking at a Stack Overflow question, and I realized something. So I'll show you that in a bit. Next slide, please. So the motivation here, I have a document and I only want to change the first 4 bytes of it. What do you do? How do you do that over HTTP? This is a common scenario in file systems, and HTTP sort of resembles a file system. There's been web dev for a while, and APIs like to use HTTP for file systems. There's S3 and a whole bunch of other file storage solutions that run over HTTP. If you want to do something like change the first 4 bytes of a document, you have to essentially design a custom API. You can design an endpoint specific post URI. So in your API, you have to document, okay, this is the URI that you call in order to make this change. Another more interesting solution is you can actually design a URI to identify just like 4 bytes within this resource. So you can say, if I add bytes equals 200 through 299, then that resource is a projection of this larger document. And that way, if I upload or post a new document over this bytes equals 200 through 299, it'll update just those bytes in this document. Again, though, this is an endpoint specific URI. It's not generic. You can't incorporate it into generic HTTP tool chains. The third one is one that's thrown around a little bit more and was recently somewhat standardized in 9110, was using the content range header in a put request. Next slide. Normally, you see the content range header being used in responses when you do a range request. I'll talk about that in a bit. First, this is what the endpoint specific post request looks like. You can make a post request with a URL encoded body, and you say, that's the byte range I want to change, and those are the bytes I want to put there. Next slide. Endpoint specific URI format again. You can make a GET request to that resource and you get just those 4 bytes. You can make a PUT request there and change just those 4 bytes. Next slide. Here's the RFC 9110 solution, which sort of standardized an existing pattern that people used where the content range header in a response normally says, you asked for this URI, and this response only includes these bytes of that resource. You can't, it's difficult to put this in a PUT request because if the server decides to ignore it, then you run into some problems. So RFC 9110 says, by agreement, if you decide to put a content range header in a PUT request, then by agreement, it can still mean the same thing as when you're getting it in a range response. So you can see in this example, a client uses a range request to retrieve just a few bytes from a file. It uses a content range PUT request to modify those bytes. And then when you make that same request again, it shows that just those bytes were changed. Next slide. Shortcomings of this solution, though, is it requires prior agreement. It's not generic, and there's not a whole lot of reason to use it over those post solutions that I talked about earlier. In fact, maybe it's a little bit more difficult because now you have to find a user agent that supports the content range header and the ability to define custom headers and outgoing responses, which is a little more difficult than just using a custom URI. Another interesting thing is the content range responses do not permit indefinite length responses. So there's no way to say, I want to append, starting at this byte offset, an indefinite length stream of audio data. I don't know when this is going to end. It's going to end sometime in the future. Just I don't know how long it's going to be. You cannot do that with content range. The current syntax of the header requires a specific length, and then you have to know that length that you're uploading in advance. And finally, my motivation for defining this is having a media type that's like the patch file format. Might also be useful if you want to describe, I want to change just these bytes of a document outside the context of an HTTP request. Next slide. Like I suggested earlier, HTTP resources aren't exactly like files on a file system, but that doesn't make much of a difference here because we're talking about, I want to just touch those bytes in this file. Also, the patch solution, which I'm going to suggest here, is relatively new. And as I mentioned, 9110 did actually start standardizing on a solution. Next slide. So as I discussed, there's a variety of use cases for something like this. If you want to do segmented uploads, if you want to upload like 0.5 gigabyte at a time of a 10 gigabyte document because you want to minimize your losses if one of those uploads fails, things like that. Many content file storage solutions, S3 and so on and so forth, have one-off APIs that allow you to do this, but there's no standard. Resuming broken uploads, writing to block devices, databases and things, and optimized file formats, which I'll show here. Next slide. Slide 9. Hey, my slide numbers made it in. So segmented chunked uploads. One way you would normally do this is you could say, put first gigabyte file, second gigabyte file, third gigabyte file, so on. But then you have to recreate the resource at the end. And also, if you're uploading this with like a content type JSON header, well, the file by itself, this chunk of a file, is going to be invalid according to that media type, which could cause errors in some standardized like middleware and things like that. Next slide. Having a solution to do byte range patches is also useful in like resuming broken uploads. So the HTTP working group has taken up this standard, and it has a header called upload offset. And it's essentially the same thing as what this does. So they could potentially adopt this instead. Next slide. Appending to a log file, right? So one of the things this should be able to do is say, I just want to append to the end of this document, wherever that is. Here, this is just an example I took off of the AWS log, CloudWatch logs, and how that works. Next, hold on. Yeah, in this case, it's just a post request, and in a custom header, it's saying, yeah, just append it to the bottom, but you could specify this in a media type instead. Next slide. Yes.
Which was the header you're saying media type?
Yeah, go back. This may not have been a very great example for me to choose. So what's actually, how the AWS logs, CloudWatch logs works is you just post to / and there's no variation in the URL. And that header at the bottom, the XAMZ target, specifies the bucket and the API event that you're storing. It's completely one-off. And then the contents of what you want to append is in the body. Next slide. Oh, even the content type is custom. Oh, okay. another application that I'm targeting is what I'm calling optimized file formats. So a lot of HTTP APIs, you just put a new document and you overwrite the entire thing. And indeed, this is how a lot of file editing on your local computer works. When you save a text file, it writes a new file and then it moves it over the old one. But there's a lot of file formats like WAV and digital audio workstation files and things like that, and databases where you just overwrite certain bytes. And this is one of the things I want to support. Here's how a WAV file works. The bytes, skipping the first 4 bytes, the next 4 bytes is a 32-bit little endian file length, which you need to update. And then you can append audio data to the end of the file. So if you want to append data to a WAV file, it's really easy. You just have to do 2 writes. You append data to the end, and then you update the header at the beginning. Like a side story, I was working at a gig, and we pulled the plug on the recorder, and the file was a 0-length WAV file, and we're like, oh no, what is the client going to do? I went, dumped the block file, dumped the whole SD card off onto my computer, scanned for that WAV header, the first 4 bytes, and then just edited the next 4 bytes to be a gigabyte or whatever, and we recovered the whole recording. Because when you finish the write, that's when it updates that next 4 bytes. So we want to do the same thing in HTTP. We want to make sure that when we append data to the end of the file, the header at the beginning also gets updated at the same time. We need that functionality. Next slide. Other requirements, it should be opportunistic. So you should be able to just send off one of these requests and the server will error correctly if it can't handle that. Whereas with the put content range solution, if you fire off a content range put request and the server doesn't support it, you'll end up overwriting the entire file and you lose all of the data there. That's no good. And it should just map directly to standard file system operations, append and overwrite, as well as determinate length and indeterminate length resources. Next. So figuring out where to define this, it's been, you could define this as a header, which is what the content range put request is, but again, you can't safely ignore it. So the other 2 common extension mechanisms that are defined are you could define a new method or a new media type. In this case, the patch method satisfies all the semantics that we're looking for. You're creating or updating the target according to some enclosed instructions. So next slide. I'll get back to this later. Next slide. Do the next one, actually. Okay, so I wrote off an internet draft that's essentially just takes multi-part byte ranges, which is when a client makes a range request that asks for multiple byte ranges in the same request, it uses the multi-part byte ranges response to envelope and encapsulate those different ranges. And then you look within the envelope of the multi-part byte ranges response, and then you can determine, this is the first byte range I was looking for, this is the second byte range I was looking for. And my idea on this Stack Overflow post was, what if we just use this in reverse? What if we patch a multi-part byte ranges and then use that to patch over the file? So that's sort of the basis for the media type I'm proposing. Next slide. There's a few other syntaxes as well. So in the ID that I submitted, I also put together a message/HTTP, which is essentially just an HTTP message, but without the first line, without the get or the 200 status code or whatever. And that way you could say content range bytes 200 through 400 or whatever. And then the actual body of that message would be the content that you're uploading. It's an existing format. There's hopefully parsers already out there for it. Should be dead simple. The third option, which was suggested, is just create a binary format. And again, in the latest draft that I posted, there's just a variation on the binary HTTP message format. It's not exactly the same for technical reasons, but binary format is interesting as well. Next slide. And so this is what actually looks like in some of these uploads. The method is patch. You specify the resource that you want to patch to. You say content type, message / byte range. And then the content of that HTTP upload body is itself an HTTP message, content range, bytes 4,200 through so whatever. And then the body of that message is the actual data that's being uploaded. Next slide. To do appends to the end of the resource and also indefinite length uploads, we would have to extend the content range header a little bit. This is not a valid content range header according to the syntax. But that is something that could potentially be taken up with the HTTP working group. If I know I've had a need to be able to make a range request that's an indefinite length. I just want to say, skip the first 5,000 bytes of this resource and stream me the rest, and don't stop until we've hit the end of the resource. It seems to me like there should be some way to get a response, a range response that's indefinite length. That's not actually possible in HTTP for whatever reason. So maybe that could be taken up there. In any event, we would need to invent a new syntax like this. Next slide. Here's how segmented uploads works. You say you can use patch to create the resource. You can say if none match star to make sure that that resource does not exist at the target. You say content range 0 through 99 to say this is the first 100 bytes of the file. You can say /200 to say this target resource will eventually be 200 bytes. And this way the target server knows that once we receive the second 200 bytes, then the upload is complete. And we know that this is a complete file, which can be useful for many things. So if you just fire off only the first response, the server knows it's not a complete file yet, and we can hold off on treating it as if it is. I think that's the last slide. Next slide. Are there any questions?
There has been lots of chat, so I'm assuming there will be questions. Mark.
Go ahead. Hello, my name is Yoshi. For the binary data, I think it's okay, but the content type has the character sets. For example, in Japanese, one character in UTF-8 has 3 bytes, but the another character set sometimes 2 bytes, or sometimes it has shift in, shift out, something like that. So that it's if the character set in the server side and the client side is different, the if the from the 200 to 300 points the wrong point, I think.
Yes, the multi-part format and the message format anticipates this a little bit. That's supported. The fields, names, and values in the media type are all just ASCII. And then everything that comes after the header portion into the body, which is the contents that you're actually patching, that can be binary. It's just opaque bytes. It's not in any particular character set. If you do want to express that character set information, you can include a field in there. That's something I didn't go into here. But yeah, that's supported.
Okay, thank you. Don't forget for the multi-language.
Yes.
Ian?
Sorry, I didn't think I was up already. Ian with AWS. So mentioned two things for S3 and CloudWatch logs.
Yeah, I was talking about you a little bit.
A little bit. One thing that you should consider, so things like CloudWatch logs are write once, read many. So you can't go back and patch log events after they've already been managed.
Yeah, that's an important clarification. Yeah. I was treating it as if the whole log stash is itself a single resource that you can append to, but yeah, that would be a tiny bit of a change.
A little bit. The second bit, I mean, you mentioned S3, like, for things like block or object storage, like this would be pretty useful. I didn't see in the security considerations bit specifically about your proposal does have the expected length of the file, regardless of how much of it you're putting in that particular request. So I'm wondering, what is the expectation if, say, I talk to a server using this functionality, and I say, I promise I'm going to send you a 6 terabyte file, and only send 1 kilobyte, and then never finish that. Like, what is the expectation? Is the recipient server supposed to allocate all that disk space, or is it supposed to say this upload is incomplete and discard it, or like what's the expectation?
Yes, that is a good question. It should probably go into security considerations. I think this has been thought through before, of course. Like already you can say, I want to allocate a file of this size on S3, and then you can upload it.
No, I'm not just talking about S3. I'm talking in general. But
yeah, I mean, to choose one service that I'm familiar with.
You don't have to have an answer now.
Yeah. I guess just something to consider, for this is like, how do you handle uploads that are either of a large size, reportedly large size, or just will never be resumed?
Yeah, that is a good consideration, because like one of the reasons I advised against, actually, if you can go back to slide like 14 or something, one of the ones I skipped over, I talked about, no, right there, 15. Next one, 15. There's supersets of this that we could also consider, like supporting splicing operations. So if you say, I want to insert 1 byte at the beginning of the file, and that file is a terabyte, then the server has to rewrite a terabyte of file just to insert 1 byte at the beginning. That's why I consider those operations out of scope. By the way, if you go and read the internet draft I've submitted already, it does support splicing operations, just to show that it's possible. I don't think that should actually go in. Or more complicated algorithms like Daryl suggested VCDiff. Those are really interesting patching file formats, which should probably be standardized as media type, but that's outside the scope of this because it could, like a very small upload could cause a very large server operation. And like, that should probably go into security considerations. Like, what if you request 2 terabytes and then never use it?
For sure. And then the second piece I was going to mention too, your draft currently returns the same response to incomplete uploads. Say I've put a portion, a chunk 1 of 6. It returns the same response as if to the last chunk, like, hey, I have all pieces of this uploaded and it's now complete. There may be a case where, say, multiple clients are sending different chunks of the same file, and one of them needs to know, hey, everyone's done, and that one of the particular clients didn't die in the middle of that. With the distributed like cloud computing environment, right? You may have multiple distinct clients that are uploading that data to your service. So
yeah. That's one of the exciting things about this, I think, is the ability for multiple clients to upload in parallel to the same resource. But the flip side of that, there's no way to do like byte range locking in HTTP. The ETAG headers and conditional headers just do like global, what's effectively equivalent to a global locks on a resource. This document, I've been drafting it for a couple of years, and there was a variation before which talked about what I called sparse resources. So if you decide to upload gigabyte 2 of a file, and that's it, well, what happens when you request the first gigabyte of that same file? That should cause an error. In this draft, I think it says that should be an error, but the idea of having sparse resources where you have a resource, but only some of the bytes are defined, some are undefined. That's a new concept. It should be better defined. There's probably good uses for that.
For sure. I see the queue's locked, so I'll...
We're almost out of time, and there's a couple other people in the queue. I've locked, I forget what the term is, locked the queue, so nobody else can talk. So please be very brief, because I don't know if we'll get to looking at consensus to adopt the document, but Q, you're up next. And then...
Right, I'll try and be quick. In how you've defined doing multiple updates in one request, so like add some bytes here and then append some to the end, how is it handled that might partially succeed? Like updating in the middle of a file might be fine, and then you get to the end of and then you append to the end of the file, and oh no, you're out of disk quota.
That's another good question that I omitted. The HTTP needs a prefer header or something where you can say, if this request fails, either like partially apply it or make sure it's atomic. And that way, if the request fails, you can go back and say, oh, it uploaded 2 gigabytes of this. I'll resume the upload at gigabyte 2. Or you can say, if I upload this file and it fails, just ignore it. I need to start over. HTTP is ambiguous about which behavior should be done. I think earlier versions said it should be atomic, but nobody really follows that.
And yeah, probably some signaling for like this part of your request succeeded, but this part failed. Yes. I didn't see anything for that, so maybe consider.
Yep.
Hi, this is Hans-Jörg again, migration enthusiast. So I appreciate any work on resumable uploads and that kind of stuff. Said that, first of all, I'm not an expert on it, but for me, this seems more like for the HTTP working groups and for HTTP APIs.
I did some forum shopping. And
yeah, you probably don't need to answer even me. It's just for the whole... yeah. Sorry? Okay. Second thing is, within the HTTP working groups, there was recently a draft in London presented, or there is work going on chunked uploads. So I'm not sure if that was probably even mentioned already, or...
Yeah,
okay, sorry. Maybe then I didn't connect.
I specifically suggested this could be a solution for the problems in that draft.
Okay. That's, so I didn't make the link, sorry. However, for me, my personal impression was a little bit that you are trying to solve a lot of issues, actually. So it was hard for me to follow, in a certain extent, how many there are. So said that currently there is not even chunked upload in a very simple way, available in a standard way. That's probably something that should be there first in a way. And I'm a little bit concerned people might be overwhelmed, implementers of servers, to support all probably what you presented, but my perspective might not be perfect on that. Thanks.
No, yeah, that's good feedback. My view is this is a very simple solution that solves a lot of problems. And that's why I talked about many different problems. And there's essentially 3 ways to solve it: using the multi-part format, or using a new message format, which derived from that, or a binary format. It's essentially just down to one of those 3 options. I've specified all 3. I'm not sure standardizing all 3 at the same time would be wise, or anyone would be interested in implementing all 3. Maybe we just pick one, like the binary format. I don't have a strong opinion yet.
Okay.
Mark, I think.
Mark Nottingham again. I'm kind of so first of all, uploading or sending a content range request for indefinite length. There is an RFC for that, 8673, I think it is. So just so you know, I'm kind of a conflicted mind about this. On the one hand, this group is here to do things like define patch formats, and I think that's great. I think it should be doing that. I think, frankly, having a document or documents defining a bunch of new patch formats, including what you're talking about here in VCDiff and whatever, would be really cool. But because you've chosen byte ranges, that implies a relationship to the HTTP machinery, and that's where it gets a little icky, I think. It's almost would be better if you didn't call it byte ranges and you just made it just a generic patch format that happens to operate in a way similar to byte ranges.
Naming suggestions are welcome.
Yeah, that would actually be more straightforward, I think, because once you start trying to relate it to HTTP byte ranges, it pulls in a lot of other issues. In terms of venue, I can see it being here. I think that it probably would be good to bring it to HTTP and talk through how it relates to other parts of HTTP machinery. And people, you say it could be used for we do have a resumable upload spec. I think it's up to the HTTP working group to figure out whether or not it wants to use this for that use case. That doesn't mean you shouldn't standardize this. But I get a little oogie about, if it's going to relate to HTTP content and byte ranges, we should make sure that relationship is appropriate and well specified and considers everything, which is why I say maybe it's better just to call it something else and not try to relate it to byte ranges.
Yeah. I mean, I've suggestions welcome. I have a little bit of difficulty figuring out what a better name would be. Like you're patching a byte range.
We call that byte shedding. We're very good at it around here.
Oh yeah. That aside, yeah.
The technical feedback I have is, for the love of everything that we hold dear around here, please don't use multi-part. Please, 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 please. Yeah.
All right.
Your feedback on using multi-part is received.
We are a minute over, and in meeting time, we try to keep the boundaries because right now we're 1 minute later than everybody else getting cookies during the break, and that's really important to IETFers. Yeah, oh yeah, it's a beverage break. So thank you, Austin, very much for bringing this and for coming here the first time. We really appreciate that. I think you got some good feedback. What I would suggest is maybe take some of that on, put up a new draft, and let's discuss adoption on the mailing list, okay? So thank you, everybody, for attending. Thanks, Daryl and Eric and all the other remote participants. I think this was a very productive meeting. At the beginning, I'm always surprised when we'll never fill 2 hours. Clearly, I'm always wrong on that. Have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you around. Take care.
Thank you all.
Sorry? I'll just stay there. I'm not going to open my computer again. No, sorry. Sorry? Yes. You are. Okay. Where the body's buried? I don't know. Enough of that. Sure.